George Galloway.
I have spoken in many adjournment debates, Madam Deputy Speaker, over the last 37 years. This audience in such high
Order,
drama.
Mr. Galloway. They seem to be leaving rather quickly, but perhaps we wait until things have settled down a little bit before you continue. George Galloway.
I hope it's clear, though, Madam Speaker, they're not leaving because I'm rising to speak, but because of the dramatic events that we have just witnessed. I was that vote. I was that one vote majority. I hope that is duly noted. I want to call this debate, dedicate this debate, to a 2-year-old boy. His name was Awaab Ishak. He died of damp, the boy who died of damp. Awaab died because he lived in a house so affected by dampness and mould, which ineluctably followed innumerable complaints unattended to of dampness in his house, owned by his landlord, Borough-wide Housing, one of the worst housing associations in England. Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, pity Awaab. In a town with an incompetent, inefficient, indeed corrupt Labour Council and a housing association that has been in special measures because of its extreme incompetence and indeed social exclusion, accused officially of othering many of its own tenants. Little Awaab would now be getting ready for school, but he's dead, and he died of damp. This is, of course, not a problem unique to Rochdale. There are millions of homes in our country unfit for purpose, unfit for human habitation. And government policy over many years has exacerbated that which has been inherited from previous generations. I give way to my honourable friend.
I commend the honourable gentleman for Rochdale for bringing this forward, and he's absolutely right. There are millions of homes in this great United Kingdom where the same problem occurs. Does the honourable member not agree that whilst rent has substantially increased, I'll give an example in my constituency, there's an additional £126 in the new annual contract that they paid last year, an increase of 18% in 1 year, yet the standard of the house has not improved and no improvements have been made. Does the member not agree that whilst rents increased, standards are slipping, that local councils need greater enforcement powers to ensure that there is a basic standard of living that can be legally secured and that everyone can have a good house to live in where they can feel safe and secure?
Everyone in Britain, a rich country that can gaily increase its defence budget, that can boast of its wealth in international tables, and yet have millions of its citizens living in inadequate housing, and in Awaab's case, dying in inadequate accommodation. It is a national disgrace, and I'm grateful to the members who've stayed for this debate, for it affects everyone's constituency, or almost everyone's constituency. But Rochdale has a special place. We're at the top of every league you wouldn't want to be, Madam Deputy Speaker, and at the bottom of every league you'd want to be at the top of. If I just give some vital statistics, we have 11.7% of our houses in what is officially deemed housing deprivation, compared to a national average of 7.8%. This is in a town that was once something in England, a notable place. 20 minutes from the gleaming spires of Manchester city centre, where the people rightly enjoy a high standard of living and prosperity. 7.8 national average, 11.7 in Rochdale. We have 35.8% of our people living officially in fuel poverty, compared to 27.8% on a national level. We have 20.5% of our people suffering poor health. 1 in 5 of the people in Rochdale suffers poor health, as compared to 17% national average. Even in the asthma stakes, we're at the bottom of the league. 7.4% of our people have asthma, compared to 6% nationally. This scandal is down to this matrix I discussed earlier of a Tory government in power and utterly incompetent, bewilderingly so, Labour local authority, now a Labour super mayor presiding over those gleaming spires in central Manchester, enjoying popularity, as undoubtedly he at least in part deserves, for helping prosperity in the metropolis, but in the towns around Manchester, and in particular in Rochdale, we have been left to sink, and nobody is doing anything about it.
Will he give way?
Gladly.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I've done so privately, can I formally congratulate him for his by-election success. He's, in my opinion, is the finest orator in the House of Commons, and it's all the better for having him here, even though I don't always agree with him. But as he was my former parliamentary neighbour, he will know that this problem extends to places like Bradford as well. Would he agree with me that housing associations shouldn't be allowed to extend their property empire whilst ever they have existing property which is clearly not fit for purpose?
Well, as I omitted to mention on the previous intervention from my honourable friend, we have a situation where rents go up and services go down. That's true in Labour authorities all over the country. These so-called housing associations, I call them so-called, I was always opposed to them. I never supported the arm's-length management organisation wheeze. I prefer council housing, where the tenants get to elect their landlord and can unelect them if they're doing a poor job. That was the whole wheeze. Of course, push the ownership of the houses to so-called associations, which are in effect only private companies. It was the privatisation of council houses that the taxpayer had paid for and that the people collectively owned that is at the root of this problem. But we, again in Rochdale, have a particular problem that killed little Awaab, that we have a borough-wide housing association, Rochdale Borough-wide, which is not fit for purpose. And it is there, at the grace and favour of a Labour council whose relationship with it is intricate and intimate, and even though I'm under parliamentary privilege, I won't go much further than that. Intimate and intricate. And until recently, nobody could challenge them. It was a one-party state, a Labour one-party state, with a revolving door between the Labour Party in council and the housing association. But it isn't only in Rochdale. As the honourable gentleman, I'm proud to personally call a friend, not politically of course, but we were neighbours and good neighbours for quite some time, has pointed out these problems of damp houses of dangerous houses, houses that can kill, are a problem for all of us. And we all know the old saw that a stitch in time saves 9. How much more obvious does it need to be that by having millions, 3.5 million inadequate homes, households in which families are living, if we fixed those houses, what would we save in health service costs, in social care costs? How many fewer ambulances would be called out if there were not hazards in houses that could be easily fixed, should be easily fixed by the landlord? How many hospital beds are taken up by people with bronchial and other associated problems because they're living in a damp house? Now, I was born in a slum, in an attic, one room with a sloping roof. I was horrifying my children this very morning, telling them that I had to sleep in a drawer. They thought my mother pushed the drawer in at night, in which case I wouldn't be here. I know how things were in the bad old days. Everything's relative. I accept that. Now I live a good life, and I assume that the minister does too. But empathy requires us to take a walk in the other person's shoes, particularly when we represent them, particularly when their votes are the reason that we are here. We're supposed to be their voice. So I invite the minister to take a walk with me, metaphorically this evening, but literally sometime soon, in my constituency, and see the way that thousands of people are living in poverty, fuel poverty, housing poverty, hazardous houses. I didn't even know the concept of a hazardous house. There wasn't much room for hazards in our one-room attic. But I now go into houses in Rochdale and see things that could kill somebody, but for the grace of God, any day of the week. It is a national scandal that over the last 14 years, billions have been withdrawn in funding for house improvements and repairs. Hundreds of thousands of houses that could have been brought up to standard have not been, cannot be, because the government funding is not there. Now, the government might say, we need the money for more wars, we need the money for more weapons, we need the money for more armies, navies, air forces, or whatever else they choose to do with our national treasure. So I'm not trying to touch the minister's heart, I'm trying to touch his mind. These improvements that are vitally needed will save the state money. Our people will be healthier, our people will be happier, and then the politicians that represent the people might be able to feel a bit more proud about the job that we have done. Save Rochdale, Minister. Save little Awaab Ishaq's neighbours from possibly meeting that dreadful, damp, mouldy death that that little boy suffered.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a very important issue, and one rightly where the House should spend time. Poor quality homes are a blight upon the lives of those who live in them, with the potential to significantly damage people's health. That, in turn, means that people can't live as fulfilling a life as they would wish, from an economic perspective may not be able to be as productive as they want, and even extends to social mobility. It is a long-standing mission of all parties to try to make homes warm, safe and decent. Tonight, We are discussing both substandard housing in general and also, due to the member raising it, Rochdale in particular. And as has already been outlined, it was the scene of a great tragedy in 2020 with the death of 2-year-old Awaab. The death of someone who had his whole life ahead of him. One of the worst tragedies in the modern civilised world, the death of a child. The law already requires landlords to ensure that the accommodation they provide is free from serious hazards, they include damp and mould, and that homes are fit for habitation. But, as was seen in Rochdale 4 Decembers ago, some are failing to meet that basic standard. Following this tragedy, the Secretary of State, my honourable friend for Surrey Heath, was clear that this was unacceptable. He summoned the landlord, Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, to explain why such a catastrophic failure had been allowed to happen. The Secretary of State followed up subsequently by barring that housing association from access to funds to build new houses and by stepping up, more generally, enforcement measures. And, more broadly, the government introduced Awaab's law in 2023, requiring landlords to investigate and then fix reported health hazards within specific timeframes, to issue written summaries of their investigations to make sure residents are kept informed, and, where necessary, to offer suitable alternative temporary accommodation to tenants where the property cannot be made safe. The next step in making that legislation real occurred at the start of this year, in 2024, with a consultation which opened in mid-January. That closed a few weeks ago, and we plan to respond to that consultation shortly and then introduce the necessary secondary legislation as soon as is possible. In addition, the government provided 15 million of taxpayer subsidy to the Greater Manchester Combined Authority in 2023 to tackle the worst cases of damp and mould, which includes works in Rochdale to many properties. On a broader level, it is very important that enforcement bodies use the powers available to them where it is proportionate and necessary to do so, something that can already happen today, and where that use should happen. That is, against the backdrop of progress that has been made. I do not seek to take away in any way from the importance of the subject which has been highlighted, from the terrible tragedy which has been rightly brought to this House both now and before, but it is hugely important we also acknowledge the position where we are. There has been progress on this very important matter of policy in recent years across all tenures. There are two big measures within the English Housing Survey. One about Category 1 hazards and one about the decency of the homes that people live in. Both have seen progress. Firstly, on Category 1 hazards, the number of owner-occupied properties in England in 2010 where they were present was over 18%. By 2022, that had been halved. For the private rented sector, again, the issue had been halved over the same timeline, from 24% to 12%. In the social rented sector, it was 10% in 2010. By 2022, it had reduced to 4%. And on decent homes specifically, in 2010, the percentage of non-decent homes in the owner-occupied sector was more than one quarter, 25.6%. By 2022, that had almost halved to 13.7%. For the private renter sector, it was nearly 40%. It has now reduced to just over 20%. And in the social rented sector, it was almost 20%, and now it is just over 10%. Progress, improvement, movement. But obviously, more to do. The government has previously announced its intention to update the Decent Home Standard and is working on doing so at the current time. It continues to work closely with local authorities and housing providers to try to make progress in this very important area, and the Ombudsman continues to show leadership in their work on this vital agenda. There has been movement forward in the last decade, but the focus needs to be continued, not least to ensure that we learn from the tragedy of Awaab and what others may be suffering from now. This issue is bigger than any one government, which is why there was progress under the last one, which the member served in, why there has been progress in all the parliaments that he has sat in, and why there is a continued commitment to do so. Progress has been made, but there is still further to go, and we shall continue to work with resolve and with determination to ensure that improvements are made.
The question is,